A minute ago, Sue leaned over and whispered to me, she said, "What's the name of your talk?" I said, "No." Straight. So Andy, if I put this in here, it should work fine?
Yeah. As long as you're short.
I'm sure. Okay, is this good?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So the name of my talk is From Fear to Empowerment, Understanding Our Power of Strength. It's really funny. I always know what I'm going to talk about. I don't always remember what I named my talk. Before I begin the formal part of the talk, though, I would like to say that I was so excited for Unity of Oroville this past 2 days because it was the Regional's Key Leader Conference. And this church had 3 people attending. Charlie and Hank and James attended, and it was a really good event. And it was marvelous for me to see so many from our church at the conference. And it was a particularly special time for me because yesterday I sat the whole day at the table with these 3 magnificent men, and I had an opportunity to get to know them better. So we are blessed in this congregation to have 3 men who are such good thinkers and who are so profound in the thoughts that they have and the questions that they ask. It was a privilege to meet Charlie and Henry and James to get to sit with you. So how many of you have hummingbirds in your yards? Yes, me too. And I enjoy watching the hummers. I don't have nearly what I had when I lived in Reading. If I'm lucky, I get 2 birds, 2 little hummingbirds. They just are not very prolific in my yard. But in Reading, I had a lot of hummers. And I had my bird feeders hung. And I used to love to watch them, watch their antics, watch them come. And these little birds that look so sweet are not nearly as kind as we think that they would be. In my yard, I actually had a bully bird. And this bird would sit on top of the feeder, and he would use his power of strength to steadfastly watch, to wait with endurance until who he perceived, or at least thought he did, who his foe was. And then in a very un-Christ-like manner, he used his power of strength to dive bomb who he thought his foe was. So that little hummingbird is not the model we're going to think of this morning when we're thinking of our power of strength. Our power of strength rests in the lower part of our back. And it is our power of steadfastness, of endurance, of being willing to persevere. It's an amazing power. And when we use this power appropriately, not like my little hummer, we can move through any situation in life because we know that that is the quality of God that rests within us as our inherent birthright to move through what we need to move through to get to the other side. Sometimes, like this little hummingbird, we use our power of strength from our human mind. We use it with willpower, and we struggle, and we push, and we may manipulate people or situations to get what we think that we want. It takes an enormous amount of energy to use our power of strength in that way. And have you not sometimes realized that when you're pushing and struggling and striving and just using every bit of energy that you have to endure, that by the time you get to the other side, you are so exhausted that you don't feel the joy in what it was that you were working to achieve? But we have been given a way to use this power so that we can move through all of life's situations with grace and with ease. We have been given the power to look at a situation, to say yes, or in our discernment, to say no. And have you ever realized that sometimes it takes more endurance to stick to our no than to move through to our yes? I find that a lot. I am an easy yes person. It's not as easy for me to say no. And sometimes when I say no, I question myself. Oh, well, I probably really do have the time to do that. I'll call back and say, sure, I can do that. And then, oh my gosh, when I do it, I'm so exhausted that I think, oh, Carolyn, come on, use your power of strength in the appropriate way. Be steadfast when you mean no. When we stay the course appropriately, life unfolds in beautiful ways for us. It may take us on a path that we didn't anticipate, but when we are alert and when we are aware, we know which direction to move, even if it isn't the way that we originally thought that we would go. And when we are willing to make that change and stay steadfastly to that beaming light before us that is showing the way, imagining the wonderful things that are happening and right there for us is part of the joy of the path. Holistic physician Bernie Siegel said this to us in New Thought for a New Millennium. It's a really wonderful book. It has Eric Butterworth and James Dillard Freeman and lots of New Thought writers, as well as physicians and others in other fields that hold the same kind of philosophy that we do. And in his article that he wrote for this book, he tells us that our work is not to try to make life easier by denying our challenges, but by learning the lessons they offer, by living through them with presence and grace. In other words, enduring, living through those challenges with presence, being aware each moment, not trying to project too far ahead, and with grace, letting God's grace work in our life, however it is unfolding. And in a challenging situation, haven't you been blessed so deeply sometimes with people that step forth for you? When you are on your path, when you have set a goal for yourself and you get halfway there and it seems almost impossible to achieve, the miraculous, seemingly miraculous things that occur that are shining that light and showing you, yes, this was a good decision. This was the right path for me. And I have the strength, even if you didn't know it was a natural birthright. You do know deeply that you have the strength to move on in that path. Sometimes we have not made a right decision. It is never too late to choose again, to change our mind. The other morning, I did something that I don't often do. I had a temper tantrum. Anger is not a big part of my life, but I was getting ready to go to this conference and I was a little bit tired and I was trying to get online or to make a call to the Quest Laboratories because I need to have a blood draw. And I swear, it did not matter what I did. I couldn't get through. I couldn't get online. And they'd say one thing and oh my goodness, you know the drill and the routine for that, don't you? And I was using my power of strength. I was pushing, I was persevering. I was doing everything that I could to get through, to make an appointment. And then I got mad. It didn't matter what happened. And then I couldn't see the joy in anything. And I picked on a lot of things that I thought weren't working. And then I realized what I was doing and I realized how I was feeling. And I remembered that I have a power of strength within me that allows me not only to change my mind, but to make amends to anybody like my husband, whom I hadn't been the kindest to. It gives us the power to know that we have that Christ Spirit living right within us. And at any time, right in the middle of a temper tantrum, we can recognize what we're doing, breathe deeply, and fall right back into that space. It allows us to be living from our highest self. Like Bernie Siegel told us, with perseverance and with trust, we use that power that lives within in the way that it was given to us to use. Author Sharon Connors, she's a Unity author, and she has written a book on the 12 powers called Resilience. It's a wonderful book because it is very straightforwardly and simply written, but she uses good examples, and it's an excellent book for people who are somewhat new to Unity or somewhat new to the idea of the 12 powers. And she calls our power of strength our spiritual backbone. Isn't that great? Thinking of our power of strength, which lives right here in the lower part of our back, our spiritual backbone. And she says that it is the power that gives us the ability to always return to living all that we are created to be, our Christ-like self, and not a powerless victim. Just think of that. We do not need to be powerless victims. I do not need to be a victim to Christ Lab. Or Quest Lab. Christ Lab. Hey, that was pretty good, wasn't it? What a nice mistake, Carolyn. To the Quest Labs. I have another way of doing it. I can turn within, I can breathe, and I can say, I can begin again on whatever path I am on. When we combine our power of strength with our power of faith, with our power that gives us hope, and we endure with faith and with hope and with strength, we can trust that what is not yet seen is truly there. Remember, what is not seen, we can lose hope with sometimes, and we forget that we can endure and we can move through. I think that when I spoke this one time, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, and I used the story of, it was a really good story. It's the story of Ben Carson and how his mom, I mean, people thought he wasn't a very smart child because he learned at a different pace. And his mom said to him, son, you gotta recognize that you gotta see what you don't yet see. And it is through our strength that we can endure and that we can persevere and we can stay steadfast to our course to see what we don't yet see. It's really So empowering what we teach in unity and the use of our 12 hours to help us to grow into that Christ-like self that is our own unique way of expressing that. And to knowing that how we express is absolutely perfect because there is no one on this planet of 7.5 billion people who express it exactly like we do. And isn't that an empowering thought? It's really quite beautiful. At my church in Reading a few years ago, I had a very good friend. Her name was Lynn. And Lynn was diagnosed with a very serious and non-curable neurological disease. It was not Parkinson's, it was not Lou Gehrig's, but it was a disease that started with her speech and it moved to her body and then it moved to her thinking. And Lynn had been a very powerful Unity student. She had been a biologist. She was a bright woman. And you can imagine the pain of her watching herself decline into someone that she just hardly recognized. And I used to go and visit Lynn, and when we first became friends, she could say sentences of a few words. It got to so she could just say yes and no. And then she moved to the place where the only way she could communicate was on a communication device. And one day when I was in her home, she wrote on her communication device, "I am ready to die. Is it okay?" And so through a lot of nonverbal language, we agreed together that yes, it was okay. She got to the point where she could no longer use her communication device because all of the neurological parts of her that allowed her to feel and to perceive were no longer working. And she used her power of faith and she used her power of strength and she made the decision for a conscious death. And she did that first by stopping eating. And after she stopped eating, her husband knew that it was time to put her in a facility where she could have 24-hour care. And there was a very nice one in Reading where she went to live. And it was almost impossible for the staff to let her stop eating. They would put applesauce on her tray, or they would put Jell-O, and then would just leave it. And then when she stopped drinking, very near to the end, it was also hard for her family to follow that. And yet Lynn stayed the course. Can you imagine the endurance and the steadfastness that it took for her to follow what she knew was right for her? Because she could no longer express her Christ self in any way, in a body and a mind that were decaying. And when you knew that there were those who thought you were doing it the wrong way, it takes strength, my friends. Strength to endure when we are on a path that others don't agree with. I have a banner, sort of like your love banner on the wall, except much smaller. And it says to follow my own path, even when others do not follow with me. And we know the strength that takes, don't we? Jesus, our way shower, used his power of strength over and over in his short ministry. He was heckled. He experienced grief. He experienced those that knew that he was not right in what he was saying. But Jesus persevered because he knew his life had purpose. He knew the body of God, the kingdom of God, lived within. And his mission was to teach that. And he was willing to endure Even when he knew his path took him through the Garden of Gethsemane to crucifixion, because that too was part of his story. And you can imagine the endurance and the perseverance that took. Those in the Old Testament also had their power of strength where they endured. And in Isaiah 40, verses 28 through 31, this is how it was spoken. And they're talking about God. He gives power to the weary, and to them that are stricken with disease, he increases their strength. Even the youths shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall helplessly stumble. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall grow wings as a dove. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. This was offered to the Israelites in their final time in Babylon. And you know the strength that they had to have to go to the promised land, even when they could not see that. Our power of strength, our power to endure, to persevere, takes us far. When I was in high school, I did all of the music I could possibly do. And I was madly in love with my choir director. Oh, I thought Mr. Gleckler was the most wonderful human being that walked the earth. When I gave him my yearbook, my senior year, I was sure he was madly in love with me too. And I could hardly wait to read what he wrote in my yearbook. And he wrote, "To Carolyn, whom perseverance has taken far." It was the most perfect message he could have written. In retrospect, I know that. Persevered from the time I was a freshman to be in an entertainment group in my senior year. And I achieved that. And Walt, Mr. Gleckler, knew that. And he affirmed what I had done. And I have carried that power of strength with me through many situations in my life. And I feel blessed. And I know that just like me, you have that power of strength that lives in you that you can choose to use in every moment. And this week, let's do that together. As we're doing Lent and as we're doing our releasing and letting go, let's endure knowing that we are on the right path to the rising of our Christ self on Easter Sunday. So I am right with you, using my power of strength this week while you use yours. And as somebody said this morning, I recall that was you finished reading the daily word saying, "I love you." And that's how I finished today. I love you all deeply, and thank you for being here.